Hi, my name is Darcy Dapra, and as John mentioned, I'm a partner manager for Google Scholar. So we're a small team. I'm the only non-engineer on the team, so sometimes they let me out here to talk to you guys, so thank you. Today, it's funny, my talk is going to segue, I think, nicely from Jay's, but it's going to be much more specific to the technical, well, more technical side of things, and what we see on the search side from Google Scholar, and how metadata can both hinder things and also help. So this has been officially blessed by my boss. I don't know if you know about him, Anurag Acharya, who heads up Google Scholar. We did some sit-downs about this, so he was going to be here today, but he's unfortunately not. But hopefully I will deliver it to, in the way that he would like. But anyway, that stuff aside. So keep the details, we'll need them later, moving beyond the limitations of print for article metadata. Metadata, I saw there was in USA Today, because of all the NSA, the stuff about spying on people, gathering information or whatever they were talking about, there was this big negative connotation to metadata that was communicated in the paper, and I'm like, oh man, why today? This is my talk about how great metadata is. It really was kind of poor timing, but this is all really good stuff. And it's interesting because a lot of the same things that Jay talked about in the same threads are kind of carried through to what we see from the search side. And this is not just for Google Scholar. I want to make that clear, that again, a lot of the things that I'm going to be going through today apply to any discovery service. Anything that's trying to understand what this content is and to bring it to the fore for a user. So I think I have to read this sort of line by line. But sowing the seeds for tomorrow's search services. So this is stuff that hopefully will happen beyond Google Scholar. There are lots of smart people out there, and hopefully somebody out there is going to come up with something even better. In order for them to do this, we have to, as publishers, be really mindful of what kinds of data is collected along the way. So growth in scholarly publishing has been super rapid and sustained. I mean, we've seen this proliferation. It's just gone gangbusters, and it's like lots and lots of articles out there. But then good search is a critical tool for scholars to navigate all of this content that's been proliferating. And doing search well requires understanding a lot of relationships. I mean, as you can imagine, the way that search works, I mean, there's so many signals, tons of different conditions. It's like trying to figure out how everything relates. And so for Scholar and other search services that attempt to do search over all of this content, the systems need to understand these relationships. And so it's authors, network of references, journals, article flow. And today's search services are pretty darn lucky because they've been able to leverage all of the work that's happened over the past 150 years, a lot of consistency in the way that articles have been published. So tomorrow's challenges, though, are going to be much bigger because you're starting to see a lot more inputs, and there's less consistency. As you get more, of course, there's more room for error. So what can we do today to help make this better? How can we facilitate tomorrow's magic? And this is what I imagine the engineers do in my office. Is like there's incantations, they wear like, I don't know, like special things, and they just like code some stuff, and they do some magical things up there. And I just sort of am this interloper who's like, hey guys, I baked cupcakes. And they're like, get out of here. You are a history person. But they're actually building these systems that do these really amazing, magical things. And in order to be able to do that well, they need to work with really, really good data to begin with, good relationships that their systems can understand. So let's preserve the relationships that we do have so that we can think about how the search services can be even better tomorrow. So this is sort of a brief overview, and I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly because I know it's Friday. Everybody's like, oh my God, I've been here all week and I just want a glass of wine or whatever. I understand. But I just wanted to go through an anecdote of just a sort of, big picture about why this collection of data is so important, as I'm sure most of you already know, but just to sort of drill down a little bit and clarify. So many of you might be familiar with this painting from Georges Seurat, late 19th century, really seminal work in art history. There are things happening in this painting that really truly, it's considered one of the paintings that ushered in the modern era for painting. There are techniques in here, there's like super subversive things happening. I don't know if you guys know about this painting, but this is sort of a vision of the bourgeoisie getting to do with things that they typically weren't allowed to do. And this is a location, actually, I guess, that was pretty popular amongst people trying to find prostitutes. But this in painting was not typical. Before this, it was history painting and people on horses, and it was more historical. And that was like the pinnacle of painting in France at that time. This is totally different. People look at this and they see something completely wild back then. And there's a technique in here that's really super interesting. It's now been called pointillism. I think it was a different term a long time ago. But there's a technique where it's like the stipple. That was not used before. So it's really interesting that this artist chose to do this. But now, what happens here? I've actually saved that image at 10 dpi. What was lost? Can you see this subversion and this, the stuff that really truly marked this as an interesting painting in history? No, not really. You can see generally that there's some people there, that's awesome. They're like, partying down by the river, whatever they're doing, that's really nice. But you've lost so much of that context. And so the same thing happens when we think about metadata. If there is not a lot collected, we lose so much of the context of an article or a piece of work. So this is what, I guess this is a complete article as far as author names go. It's Andrew Matthew Smith and Stephen Mark Evans, who is, I borrowed that name, that's my father-in-law. I just had to put that in there. Jung-Ik Kim and Ellen Ann Lee. These are complete names. This is a complete picture of these authors' names for this article. But now, and this is the search system loves this. Search systems everywhere who are trying to make sense of author names are like, yay, really excited, this is complete. But then what happens is that if the data, of course, is not complete, and you can see here, we've got the complete one, the blue, and then there's another article and it's got A. Smith and S. Evans and E. Lee and A. Smith and J. Kim and E. Lee and so on. And who knows, maybe A. Smith is Andrew Matthew Smith to a system, to a user. Sometimes it's even hard for a user to figure this out. But for a system, imagine how difficult it is. Because the system is looking at these pieces of data and trying to understand those relationships. And so here, in this example, and this happens a lot, and our engineers have tried to work through this problem over and over, and any other discovery service that has to handle names, I'm sure, has had to try to approach this. But what it's doing is the system only sees this A. Smith and these abbreviated names, and it's grouping them all and thinking that maybe all of these articles, all of these data are actually the same person. And so Andrew Matthew Smith A. Smith, yeah, cool. But who knows, maybe it's Audrey Smith. It could be anybody. And so this is what happens on the system if there's incomplete data. The system's trying to understand, and this ambiguity just continues to get worse. And it was so funny when I made this, speaking of art history stuff, I was like, oh, this looks like a Damien Hirst dot painting. It's like, oh, full circle. Just bringing this stuff in. But the system is totally confused and thinks that these are all A. Smith. And without that complete data, it's really the systems out there, the search services, are trying to do the best they can to disambiguate and to bring that information to the fore in a real way that people and the machines driving the search results can understand. So we have a recommendation here for publishers, and that's use as verbose a format for names as possible. This can be also affiliations, complete. And OrcID, and there's other initiatives out there that are trying to make this simpler. But right now, this is for today. And this is for building on what's available today, again, for what systems can be developed later in the future. So Stephen Mark Smith is awesome. If that's not possible, Stephen M. Smith or S. Mark Smith, or in the very least, Stephen Smith. Otherwise, you're losing so much. Again, it's just hearkening back to that 10 DPI image where you're losing a lot. And so that's something to keep in mind. As publishers are collecting data, try to make sure that the collection is as verbose as possible. There were a lot of things in print that limited data collection. There were space considerations, page charges, things that made it so that publishers couldn't collect as much information as they can now. This is a digital format. There's not the same sort of page charge construct anymore. And then, so outside of that, verbose data collection, another problem that has been sort of hampering some of the work that the engineers for Scholar and other search services do is, again, some of these legacies from print in terms of formatting. So this is your article, and it's got all of these references. Each one here is a unique reference. But because sometimes publishers will limit the number of references that can actually be included in the paper because of this old print legacy way of formatting, authors might instead reference a book or a review article. That's a mature work. And it's something they can reference, but what happens is that that thread or that evolution of their thought, it becomes much, much harder for somebody, just a person who's trying to figure out the evolution of their thought, or a system to understand. And so, if at all possible, we're recommending that publishers leave more space for references. It's a digital environment. Hopefully that won't be restricted, or I guess hampered by the ability to include as complete information as possible for even references. Sorry, this is my sad drawing of my metadata man character. I had a few comments earlier that was like, that's distracting. It might be a little bit, so I apologize. But something Jay said also is the more structured information, the better. So here, this is another sort of extension of some of the problems that the search services grapple with, is these cryptic formatting of references in articles. So I'm not going to say which publisher. I mean, I don't know. You might be able to guess by reading the citations. But this is pretty, this is kind of standard for some disciplines. So only the initials for the author names are used in the references. And then there's something else pretty critical here that's missing. There's no article title. So if you're a machine and the machine is trying to understand what that piece of information is, there's a lot of stuff that's missing. I mean, even it's sometimes difficult for a human. If you're reading that and you're trying to look through the references to see, oh, maybe that article would be interesting for me to read. If there's no article title, how do you know? And then think about the machine who's trying to determine what that piece of information is, and it gets even harder. Oh, sorry, did you?
Yeah, I wanted to take.
Oh, here we go. Sorry. Oh, gosh.
No, that's okay.
Okay. So, for references especially, and I think, for most people, it's probably not much of a stretch to think, oh, I've got 5 minutes. Okay. Don't worry, John. It's going to go fast. So Include all article titles and references and use as verbose names in references as you can. Also use full journal names and not acronyms. We see this a lot. JBC could be Journal of Biological Chemistry. It could also be Journal of Big Cosmos. I don't know. It could be anything. You have to be more descriptive so that that data can make sense to not only the human reader, but also a machine that potentially is trying to make sense of it. And it could help those poor engineers who are up there doing their magical things to make better statistical models. So make each citation a separate entry in the reference section, and do not group multiple citations into a single reference. Very difficult to uncouple that. Also use references section instead of footnotes section or references. Footnotes are a lot more difficult for a machine to understand as well. And avoid use, again, of partial citations such as IBID. I'm totally guilty of that. Having come from a humanities background, we love that. But now I think about it, and I'm just like, oh, I probably made a few people cry. And so finally, because of all this lack of data collection, and it's just a legacy of what sorts of things happened in print. Yes, his shirt says nuts for or nuts about grandma.
Is that yours?
This is mine. But, and this is, yeah, maybe some little hope that he'll actually be a productive person sometime in his life. I'm hoping for C's in community college, but that's okay. Maybe if he becomes a researcher and he thinks about these things and he's modeling systems, trying to understand what came before him, it would be really nice if he was able to work with a really complete set of data. So thank you very much. Hopefully I kept within the time, and I appreciate it.